This is the Well Brewed Podcast, where we share our 40 plus years of commercial brewing experience to help fellow beer lovers on their journey of building a brewery. Full disclosure, we own a brewery equipment business, but we aren't here to sell you anything. This is truly about helping the industry we love. So, g'day. Welcome to episode 4 of the Well Brewed Podcast. My name's Lockie, and along with my mates Clemmy and Jake, we're drinking fresh local beer and chatting about building breweries.
What have we got today?
We are drinking
Status quo.
The best beer in the world, isn't it?
Getting close.
It won Gabs.
Won Gabs this year. And it was,
Gabs,
I don't know about the beer one, but the music poll, Hottest 100, is the most voted on music poll in the world. So every song that wins that is the best song in the world at the time. So if that's true for beer, this is also the best beer in the world, which, judging by how it's tasting, I'll give it that.
Pretty close too.
Very good.
Ooh, tasty.
So in today's episode, we're discussing budgeting. Now, budgeting might sound super, super boring, but it is a necessary evil. And surprisingly, actually, in our experience, one of the first things that people attack when they're planning their brew pub. Now, we've seen budgets in all formats, written on napkins and amazing spreadsheets that basically cover all levels of reality as well. But let's dive in and have a crack at breaking it all down for you. So, Clemmy, why don't we start with you and talk about how we're going to approach budgeting and, where you'd start?
It's a good one. I think we get a bit excited sometimes about, the dream and aspiration to build a brewery and own a brew pub and all that sort of stuff. And so we dive in thinking, all right, what do I need to do? I need to buy a brew house. I need to do this. I need to do that. But my thinking is that you actually need to come back to, as a business owner, understanding the lifestyle you're trying to achieve from building and owning a brew pub. So I think, there's a couple of different ways, or a number of, there's plenty of different ways you could split it, I suppose. But I mean, there's guys that want to own a brew pub and be completely immersed and have control in every area. They want to be the brewer, the salesman, everything, the bartender, etc. And that's part of their journey. That's what they want. That's what they want to get out of the whole process. Now that budget's going to probably look a little slightly different to another budget where, if you would like to have a great venue and have fantastic people running that venue, and you're a little bit more hands-off and got control of things from a higher level position, and you've got your weekends and evenings to yourself, and you're allowing your team to run your brewery or your brew pub. So I think that is the good place to start, is understanding what lifestyle you're trying to create from your brew pub, and that can help you make decisions on what your budget needs to look like, and then from there you need to really put some good financial modelling in place. So build some mock P&Ls to really understand what your capital expenditure is going to be, what your overheads are going to be.
So when you're building these mock P&Ls, what would you say would be the best way to, stress test them? Like, what variables are you changing to see the cause and effect?
It's a very good one, Jake, because I think you've done a fair bit of sensitivity analyses around exactly that question.
It's a little bit loaded, but...
It was a little bit loaded, but hey, I need all the prompting I can get. So you definitely want to consider your market, obviously. Number one is, who are you selling to? Where is your brew pub? What can you sell your beer for? What financial model are you going to use? So are you going to sell all your beer across your bar. Okay, so it's kegs or serving tanks. Are you going to have a bar and a takeaway situation only? Are you going to have a brew pub with a bar subsidising a wholesale model? Are you having direct to consumer 100% wholesale model? Like, that's the broad range of models. So when you're putting your financial model together, probably the most sensitive thing is the cost of beer. So what are you going to be able to sell your beer to your customers for? Now that's going to drive profitability across your whole business. Yeah. Jake, you've done all the sensitivity analysis.
Well, I would just say, yeah, it definitely is the main driving factor, especially in a brew pub model, is how much you're going to sell the beer for, which seems obvious but is often overlooked.
I guess I'd just jump in and say the other things that can be a real killer for your bottom line are rent, which is fixed. Once you sign up to a rent agreement, you're pretty much stuck there. And if your rent is too high, and I think the rule of thumb is about 10% of revenue should be rent and outgoing. So you need to consider that when looking for a site. I think we spoke about that a few episodes ago. The other one is wages. Can really blow out if you're not monitoring how your wages or when you're scheduling and rostering people. If you've got people on that don't need to be there, it could be a real killer to your bottom line. And so I guess when it comes to budgeting, it's considering your rent, you probably build your model around your rent figure that you need and don't negotiate on that from your end or don't give in. As far as wages goes, you want to budget on something that's realistic though, because you don't want to budget on wages and then find out that you never can get by on that, and then you screw your bottom line anyway because you haven't sold your beer for enough as it goes. So I guess that's probably those two things that really can hurt you in the long term if you get them wrong to start with.
Your number one overhead is always going to be labour.
Let's assume that whoever's doing this, building a brewery, has settled on a model that they want to do, be it wholesale, brew pub, owner operator, silent owner, whatever. And then let's go, I would say there's two budgets that are interlinked that need to be considered. There's your project budget from when you start up your idea to when you open your doors, and then there's your ongoing budget. So CapEx, and OpEx. It falls into that, and then your OpEx, right? And so when you're actually running and operating your brewery and how you're going to run that thing day to day. So the two affect each other, but they're not. They should be standalone pieces of work. So I guess we should probably start with project budget, your CapEx, and looking at breaking that down a little bit. Sure. I guess there's probably is there, Jake, you've done a fair bit of this. Is there ways that you would break it down into sections? Is there ways you would interrogate each of those sections into breaking down into separate line items, and how you then find those numbers and logic check them against what quotes you've got or what you've heard, etc.?
Yeah. So I guess the best way to break things down is to look at the individual trades that you need to get in to do certain jobs, and try roll as much of them in together so that they're coming to you to do a larger chunk of work. So for example, you're going to have electrical fit out in your brewery and on all of your equipment, but you're also going to have electrical fit out in the venue, lights, exit signs, light up mirrors in the toilet, power outlets for ice machines, whatever it may be. A good way to go is to have your layout pretty much concretely set up, ready to go, and just get trades to quote on the installation of X, Y, Z. And even if you are on a budget, I still think it's really worth having a concrete plan and potentially something drawn up by a hydrologist and by an architect so that everybody's working off the same documents. This will allow you to get a much clearer picture of what your total capital expenditure is going to be for your fit out and your installation of your equipment, and give you a reference document that you can hold people accountable for.
So important, because tradesmen can't quote or give generally overinflated quotes if they don't know, if there's uncertainty. The more uncertainty there is, the more misunderstanding as to how they're running and where they're going, the more overinflated that quote's going to be, especially if you're asking for a fixed cost.
Yes. The next one is to get multiple trades to quote on things and fact check it. Look at the price of copper piping and get asked for a breakdown of their quotes and compare them. Are they charging you through the roof for something that they shouldn't?
Or are they misunderstanding something that you've given them,
Which is also another possibility.
Probably don't just assume that they're trying to rip you off. It's not necessarily the case, but...
No, but just keep what I'm trying to say is keep your wits about you. Like, you're dealing with a multifaceted, complex project. They probably never heard of a MASH work pump before, and may think that it's something completely different. But at the end of the day, if you phrase it as a 2 kilowatt pump that works on 3-phase 50 hertz, they'll have a much clearer understanding of what you're doing. So get organized, get your data together, break things down into plumbing specs, into, if you've got steam, boiler specs, steam piping, fabrication, your air and gas systems. They can be supplied by the same person. You can also negotiate terms on those things. So list everything out, categorize it, talk to tradespeople about what their capabilities are, and check it off as you go.
So would you break it down when you're going through building a budget? Would you break it down into like brewery, kitchen, bar fit out, toilets, or would you go equipment, which includes brewery, tanks, dishwasher for the bar, whatever, and then trades, and then how would you build that out?
I would probably break it down into trades. Work that needs to be done by an electrician, work that needs to be done by a plumber, work that needs to be done by so on and so forth. Plumber is a tricky one because you've got two types of plumbers. There's type A and type B. Obviously, anything handling high pressure gas needs to be certified by a type B plumber. That's down the line. But just break down your trades rather than, because it's one project. You'll have timeline of delivery for both sides, and you're going to get a better, more cohesive project if you've got one trade that can handle both. Also, the other thing I would say, just while I've got this train of thought, is sit down with all your trades at once and get them to come up with a plan together. And this is where the hydrologist comes into play. If you can have isometric drawings of how your cable runs, pipe work, everything's going to go, they can share the same bit of Unistrut. Sure, there's exclusion rules, but you're just paying one person one X amount of labor to do that one run, and then it's covering all your trades runs.
Sounds like a pain point for you previously, mate.
At every job site.
I guess it's a good point. You don't want a plumber running pipe clips and then a Sparky running cable tray and then your boiler installer running Unistrut, and then it just becomes massive blowout. I guess aside from trades, like there's fit out costs and equipment purchases. Like what else is in there? Like, I mean,
you're going to need to be spending money on on marketing and merch while you're going through this phase. You're going to probably want to have like cups with your logo, like glasses with your logo on it. You're going to want to have your point of sale system. That's not a negligible cost. That costs a fair bit of money. So just make sure that you got that. Having internet fit out on your site as well. That's another cost that kind of people sometimes neglect. You can't really use your home router to cover a big warehouse full of people, and it doesn't have the load to have 50 people in there connecting on their phones. So
you can't use your home router for podcasting, it turns out, as I've found out the hard way. 5% uploaded so far. So thanks, IronNet.
It's good to talk to suppliers that you're going to be working with in the future, raw material suppliers as well, and see if they can negotiate paying for your system install and covering the cost, or making it part of your monthly costs, which is part of the balance that you were just describing about CapEx versus OpEx. Because honestly, the less money you can spend getting from idea to pouring beer, the better, because then you still have money to cover staff, your operating expenses, your rent. Like if your project blows out by a couple of months because of you miss a boat or something trying to load your equipment on a ship, that's still a month worth of rent you've got to pay. And if your rent's like tens of $1,000s a month, then you're going to be out of pocket that money, and you're not going to see a return for it.
Yeah.
I was wondering where budgeting was going to go, but we have got into the detail of like the operational part of the budget. Typically, what sort of overrun do we see in projects?
I think the most common overrun I see is people underestimating how much they're going to have to spend to push their DA or their development application through council. There's a tremendous number of consultants that you need to speak to, and they all cost money. So if you want to get your DA through in a timely manner, then you're going to have to pay for it.
The other overrun, I think, is like installation cost and timeline. I think things take longer than we expect. There's a really good Freakonomics podcast, actually, I listened to a few years ago, which is about why every single project ever runs over time and over budget. And it's to do with the psychology of humans and why we look at everything through rose-colored glasses.
Do we use utopian modelling when we're putting projects together?
Yeah, it's best case scenario, and it never runs like that. And everyone hurts for it. So I don't know if you can find that podcast. We'll put it in the show notes. But it's worth noting. I think a trap that people fall into as well is having an idea of, I want to start a brewery, I've got this much money, before digging into the detail. And then it hurts when you start fleshing it out, because it can be quite different to what you expect or what you have in your mind.
The other thing I was thinking of is, before we even get into this style of thinking around the capital budget, the size of the venue and how many seats and people and all of those things that you can fit in is going to be critical in almost every situation, unless you've got a full wholesale model or a direct-to-consumer model, maybe.
The bums on seats principle.
The bums on seats rule. Like if you've decided you're going to, and I think for me it's a very good model, one that's producing the most margin is and creates great brand awareness, is having your own brew pub, having people come in and consume across the bar. So, deciding on how many people you can actually fit in there and how many seats you're going to turn over and all of those. There's some fairly general rules out there, isn't there? So,
yeah, I think the one that I use, which really does provide what I think like a fairly accurate representation of what you can do, is if you have a bar area or a seating area, you've got essentially 1 to 1.3 meters squared per person. Yeah. And that's for them to sit comfortably and not be rushed.
That was 1 to 1.3 meters squared per person seated.
Yes. Seated. And then the other one is that most people that come in, like, this is just an average, doesn't go for most of the drinkers, listeners, that would be listening to us talk now, because if you're this far into a brewery podcast, you probably do more than this, but most people that enter your venue are going to drink 2.8 schooners per person. And that's a
2.8
metric that I read from, who did that?
A reputable source?
A reputable market analysis source.
I'd just be concerned that every customer's leaving 0.2 of a schooner undrunk,
That's
what are you doing in the brewery?
DO is a killer.
Shit jokes for shit blokes.
I guess what I was trying to highlight is that you need to be considering all of these things because it's going to drive your financial model. So that can affect how much you're going to spend on your capital budget. So you really need to have a number in mind on your budget and try and fit things into that. So that's going to change a lot of your decision making.
What I would recommend would be to build your P&L to be spitting out an EBITDA and a metric of percentage for how much your rent is going to cost. So say it's 10% or your mortgage repayments. That shows you the percentage. Then you can, based on the occupancy of that site, so you do a mock floor layout, you go, okay, this site can fit 200 people. It's fairly easy to do that. And then
Jake's engineering brain has kicked in pretty hard.
Yes,
it's a little bit. Yeah.
But then you can use that data to kind of back calculate, is this a feasible site? Is the rent too high? Should I negotiate the rent down? You'll be able to use these metrics to be able to back calculate. And you need to do some modeling of occupancy, because at 12:30 for lunch on a Tuesday, there's no way your venue is going to be at capacity unless you got 2 seats. So,
and your mum and dad are there.
And your mum and dad are visiting you, and they're in town.
Hi, Mum, by the way. I didn't get one in last episode.
I guess the point is that you really need to live and die a bit by how your model's going to work and budget to make sure that it's not 10 years before you're making a profit.
And don't get me wrong, like, every model is terrible and it's definitely going to be wrong, but
I wouldn't say every model. Not every model's terrible. Every model is wrong is probably a fair.
Every model is wrong, and
some models are not.
Some
terrible.
models are less wrong than other models. Is what I was trying to get at. So, be reasonable with your assumptions. Be conservative, and do everything around a break-even sort of case, like
worst case scenario.
Validate it. Like, put soft code your spreadsheets so that you can make changes so that all of your equations travel through, and set it to 0. Like, how many kegs do I have to sell a week, a day, to get to break even? And then if it's only like 5 kegs, then you're like, sweet.
Go and talk to people and logic check your assumptions. Like, all of this modeling is going to be based on assumptions that you have. And so the more you can interrogate that, and the more that other people in the know can interrogate that.
Yeah. If your model says you're breaking even at 40 kegs on a weekend, then it's probably not going to be feasible.
Well, it depends how big your venue is.
Yeah, true. Definitely true.
Yeah, it's a tough one, man. And there's so many variables that go into it. I guess this whole episode has turned a lot more into modeling than it has budgeting, but I don't think that necessarily matters, because it really...
You can't have one without the other.
It's kind of the precursor to doing your budgeting. And maybe that's the takeaway, is that it's really important to understand what lifestyle you're trying to create and what business model you want. So then you can then model out all the aspects of your business and see where your profitability is, and then understand what you can spend on getting open and what you can spend on operating. And if it's feasible, before you even start jumping into, project budgets.
Yeah.
Would that be a fair takeaway?
Yeah,
I'd say so.
It's a good takeaway.
And the other takeaway is work out a budget and then double it, and then double the length of time that you're expecting it to take.
Yeah.
And then that'll get you somewhere in the ballpark of where you're going to be.
It's funny, man. Like, we've all built a number of breweries and we've heard that rule. You always laugh when you haven't done it and someone says that. You're like, yeah, sure. I spent every night last month on this budget and I'm pretty confident. And then every time you build it, wow.
I've accounted for everything down to the egg cups.
Yeah. But then you build a brewery and you're like, oh man, it's true. I spent twice what I planned. So it does happen. Particularly from startup, first one.
There's a serious side to this. Like this is a good part of your life for, just getting this going and started is a good part of your life for 12, 18 months, 2 years. And then you're up and running. And the hardest year is the first year. And then you've got to deal with the decisions you made right at the start around the venue size, around your lifestyle and all of those things. So
when you probably knew way less than you do now.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we've seen people unfortunately struggle because it wasn't exactly what they thought it was going to be, and there's a lot more time if you're going to do the brewing and the venue management that goes into it. There's
lots of
involved.
Unglamorous expenses that you will often get blindsided by. Like, we haven't even touched on it on this podcast, but wastewater, trade waste.
Yeah.
There's nothing cheap about that.
And it's gross.
Yeah, and it's gross. And you don't want to be thinking about it. You want to be thinking about having great beers and...
Yeah, shiny stainless steel.
Shiny stainless steel, not what's going to be under your floor fermenting and growing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, and that's the other upside, right? So if you do get it right, and you spend your time and effort around understanding your budgets and understanding what lifestyle you want, and you're realistic about your overheads and your working capital and all of the things we've mentioned today, like, it can be such a rewarding experience. So rewarding to have built something like this where people come in and actually drink amazing beers that you've brewed. Yeah, amazing and rewarding experience. So
yeah, man. Well, look, cheers to that. It's probably a wonderful note to wrap up on. And
cheers.
Thanks,
Thank
Clemmy.
you, Mountain
Thanks,
Culture,
Jake.
for beers.
Should do
Thanks,
my wrap
lads. Up. Cheers.
Well, that's about that for episode 4 of the Well Brewed podcast. And as always, if you have any ideas of subjects you'd like to hear about or any specific questions you want answered, please hit us up on Facebook or Instagram at wellbrewed, WELLBREWD, or email us at podcast@wellbrewed.com.au. Or your mum, you can just text me. You've got my number. Cheers.
Cheers, boys.
Bye.